הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות, על הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה, בזמן הזה שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה.
Welcome to Jewish Life, a program presented in cooperation with the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. I'm your host, Stewart Ain. Every week we present programs of particular interest to the Jewish community, and today my guest is Mordechai Kedar. He's a senior research associate at the Begin-Sadat Center for Strategic Studies in Israel. He served for 25 years in the Israel Defense Force military intelligence, specializing in Syria, Arab political discourse, Arab mass media, Islamic groups, and Israeli Arabs, and he's an expert on the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamic groups. Welcome to the program.
Stewart, thank you so much for having me. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach to you. And what we wanted to talk about was the changing nature of the Middle East, and with the Trump administration during its tenure really changed the landscape. I think it was kind of the prod. It did not go the traditional route in terms of dealing with the Middle East, routes that had failed in the past. It tried something new. Can you talk about that?
Well, definitely there are changes in the Middle East in a direction which was under the current, because usually governments are talking with governments, with ministers, with prime ministers, presidents, kings. Usually a State Department or any foreign office usually ignores what happens in the streets, because it doesn't speak with the street. It doesn't have any conversation with the street. It doesn't have any discourse with the street, because ministers speak to ministers. So as long as the regimes are speaking in a way, you don't see what happens in the far echelons in the streets. And what happened in the Arab world during the last 10 years, since the eruption of the Arab Spring, is that the street, I wouldn't say public opinion, because, in these countries, you don't really come out with polls or things like this. But the street changed dramatically. First of all, there is something which came already in the 90s, which is the social media. Started with telephones, cell phones, continued with all kinds of applications like Facebook, Twitter, later Instagram, WhatsApp. And this actually gave the man in the street a power to become a journalist, although he doesn't have the license from the government. He can disseminate whatever he likes. He can, and not only this, he can hide behind a pseudonym which he chooses to appear with. Means he's not afraid anymore from the mukhabarat, from the intelligence, from the local FBI, in these countries. This is one change, that everyone now can express his mind and say whatever he like against his own country, against his regime, against all kinds of people, and against, this is something new. Secondly, the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring actually showed that there are the leading Arab countries, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Libya, the four countries which were the center of the Arab world, of the Arab propaganda, of the Arab socialism, and the hatred against Israel and against other countries like the United States sometimes. They were actually, for a long time, mercenaries of the Soviet Union. Means they were progressive, as they call themselves, because they were socialists, they were a nationalist, And they actually were leading the discourse of the Arab world, imposing their agenda on the mass media and on the political echelons in all the Arab countries, because they were afraid of them. First of all, Egypt is a very big country. Egypt is like a third of the Arab world, only Egypt. So Gamal Abdel Nasser, when he was there, he could, use his power, his magnitude. Then Syria was also with all its ways how to manipulate other countries. So countries like Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, the kingdoms like Morocco, like Jordan, felt intimidated, felt under pressure, felt that they have to hold to something strong. And this is why they always were with the United States of America, with Europe, because they were afraid of those countries which were the mercenaries of the Soviet Union. So this was the Arab world until the Arab Spring. Here comes the Arab Spring, and all these progressive countries, socialist countries, nationalist countries, Ba'athist countries, are all a wreck. Look at Syria. Syria is a bloodbath. Iraq is a wreck. Iraq. Egypt also is sinking in its own problems. Libya is a bloodbath. Another one. A swamp of blood, tears, and fire. So all those countries which were driving the
Dominant. Sure, they
pushing
were the dominant. Sure.
Today they are struggling to survive. They have no power, and the little power which they have, they try to fight with local gangs like ISIS or others. And they actually were exhausted, and they actually are not existing as players on the Arab stage, means the stage of the Arab world. So all those countries which were formerly the traditional countries, the conservative countries, the counter-revolutionary countries, as they were depicted all those years, today they can feel that they can do whatever they like. They're much freer from the hegemony of the discourse of the radical discourse of those countries. And this is the time for Saudi Arabia, which always was feeling afraid of Egypt, of Syria, of Iraq, of course. Today, Saudi Arabia can feel very comfortable because all those countries which once were trying to undermine Saudi Arabia, today they are undermined by themselves.
But so they have a fear of Iran, don't they?
Wait a minute. So Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Oman, Bahrain, countries which were in the margin of the political life of the Middle East until 10 years ago, became the only functional countries because the radical countries became dysfunctional. You can add to this Lebanon, which is dysfunctional for a long time already. So more or less the weight of the Arab world shifted from the countries which once were leading the Arab world, means the radical countries, the revolutionary countries, the progressive countries as they call themselves, to the traditional countries, the kingdoms and the emirates, those who still are people stuck in the past. But turns out that this is the only thing which works in the Middle East. When you bring European ideas to the Middle East, they have no roots in the culture of the Middle East. So if ISIS comes, the whole thing blows up. So the whole socialism, who heard about socialism in Syria? So this is what happened. When you have a culture which is rooted, when a state which is rooted in the culture of the area, of the people, this state has an ability to be a durable country. While if you bring an ideology from the Soviet Union or from the West or from wherever you come, and you try to implant it into the Middle East against the culture of the area, it is being rejected. Just like you transplant an organ in a body and it doesn't fit, so it being the body ejects it. Okay, so the same thing happened with the culture which came, like socialism and all these new isms which came from Europe, failed totally in replacing the culture of the Middle East. So this is actually the process which brought today Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Bahrain and some others to the front line, however, what we find out, another thing, that today the Arab world not only is being divided between failing states and successful states, Iran is actually taking over all the failing states. It took over Iraq, it took over Syria, it took over Lebanon by Hezbollah, it took over Yemen, and it took over Gaza, the Hamas in Gaza. And lo and behold, there is another country in the Middle East which actually is subordinated to Iran, which is Qatar. And Qatar, although it is the neighbor of Saudi Arabia, although it is a traditional state, yet this state became a Ikhwani, means Muslim Brotherhood supporting country. And because they share a gas field with the Iranians, they are in bed with the Iranians. So, and this explains why Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and Bahrain, and more countries like Egypt and Jordan actually boycott Qatar. Because Qatar actually sides with a coalition against the coalition of Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Bahrain, Jordan, Egypt, and lo and behold, Israel could join that coalition of Saudi Arabia and the traditional states, means the conservative states. And this is actually what the change of the Middle East, which actually works for the benefit of Israel. Because those countries which today lead the Arab world, they don't share a border with Israel. They don't carry the memories of the wars between them and Israel, unlike Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. They don't have people who lost their father, son, brother in the wars against Israel. And they actually have nothing against Israel. We don't have any border issues with them or territorial issues with them. Okay, we have some problems of being Jewish while they are Muslims, all these things. But today, since Iran threatens them, they push aside all the differences with Israel, and you can see them in one day. Israel has normalization with both Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. Now, and here is the big difference. Egypt and Jordan, who made peace with Israel, Egypt in 1979 and Jordan in 1994, the peace with them is a cold peace. These are embassies with very minimal cooperation on security, some cooperation, and on energy, more or less, and then qualified industrial zones because America maintained pressure on them, so they agree. But nothing more. No tourism, no business, no cultural exchange, orchestras, theater, nothing. While the Emirates and Bahrain, already from the beginning, they signed a normalization. Means tourism, orchestras, theater, academic cooperation, research, development, agriculture, whatever, you name it. And the gates are open for Israeli internship to start investing, working together, investing in other places, something which we were dreaming about for many years, which the peace with Egypt and Jordan did not give us the normalization. And now, from the beginning, the first step, normalization. So this is actually what makes the difference. And now you can talk also about what I recently wrote or published about the Palestinian issue. As you might know, for many years, people thought that without solving the Palestinian problem, nothing will be achieved. There is actually a clip which was recently unearthed by somebody whom I know and was put on the social media. Look at this. This was for 2016. Forum Saban. I think that's John Kerry speaking with the host.
And let me tell you a few things that I've learned for sure in the last few years. There will be no separate peace between Israel and the Arab world. I want to make that very clear to all of you. I've heard several prominent politicians in Israel sometimes saying, well, the Arab world's in a different place now. We just have to reach out to them and we can work some things with the Arab world and we'll deal with the Palestinians. No, 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 and no. I can tell you that reaffirmed even in the last week as I have talked to leaders of the Arab community. There will be no advance and separate peace with the Arab world without the Palestinian process and Palestinian peace. Everybody needs to understand that. That is a hard reality.
Okay?
That was the line. That was the line. And I see that Tony Blair has now said that he believes, as we've said, that the Palestinians come last. The Arab world comes first. And I had the quote here someplace. Yes, it is. Here it is. Peace must first be established between Arab states and Israel, and then the Palestinian issue may be included. That's what he said.
All of a sudden, he sees the light. Where was he for 10 years?
There you go.
Okay? Here you are. And for this, you have to understand why people today in the Arab world more or less couldn't care less about the Palestinian issue. First of all, they have their own problems. Iraq, Syria, Libya. What do you think they care about Palestine? They care about what they eat today in the evening. Never mind tomorrow, today. So what do you think? That now they're going to go and liberate Jerusalem? Or for what? Okay, so this is, and ISIS, of course, which brought the Arab world to a totally different place. They are now much more afraid of the Islamists because everyone is afraid that his neighbor becomes funded by the ISIS propaganda, because the ISIS propaganda comes through the social media, and everybody can watch the beheadings and everything, and everybody who, somebody buys a knife in the store, everybody starts to ask questions. Why do you need the knife? This is what happened in the Arab world because of ISIS. People started to suspect their neighbors, their children. So this is what happened there. And, we don't see this. I mean, we in the West, we don't see this thing because this happens in the streets. The ministers do not talk about this. Prime ministers, kings, or whatever, they don't talk about these things. But this is what happens behind the scenes. So first of all, the Palestinian problem, in many places, they have much worse problems. Secondly, don't forget that we are now 72 years after the Nakba, or what they call the problem, the disaster of Palestine. 72 years is like 3 generations. It is not easy to keep a problem alive for 3 generations. Just look at what happens with the Holocaust, with the awareness of the Holocaust, even within Jews, and not to mention others who didn't go through this, or their families. So if you understand that even within Jews, the awareness of the Holocaust is fading with the time. So what do you expect that people in Iraq will be against the Israelis for 72 years, day and night, only because they occupied Palestine 72 years ago? Who in Iraq cares about Palestine? Okay, and so the time here works against the Palestinians. against anyone who thinks that the Palestinian problem is alive and kicking as it was 50 years ago. No, it is not. Because everything in life fades. Okay? Who today remembers the Armenian Holocaust of 105 years ago? Okay? Things are fading in the world. Who remembers the horrors of the Second World War? Who remembers September 11, Stewart?
Yes.
Go in the street in New York and ask what happened in September 11. People will look at you as if you landed from March. Okay? So this is another thing. Third thing, recently, I've read the last 5 years, all kinds of stories were revealed about what happened here in Palestine or in Eretz Israel. I'll give you a good example. The channel, the Al Jazeera channel, is an Ikhwani, Muslim Brotherhood, sponsored by Qatar, and the main anchor, the mastermind of Al Jazeera is a guy named Jamal Rayyan. Jamal Rayyan, he is the most, I would say, prominent journalist in the Arab world because he has the highest pulpit and the most powerful channel. Al Jazeera, no, Jamal Rayyan is a Palestinian. He was born in Tulkarem. And he went to Jordan and became Muslim Brotherhood. And he was kicked out. And he went to Qatar. And he became the main anchor already for 24 years. November, because Al Jazeera was launched in November of 1996. 24 years, the man leads Al Jazeera and disseminates hatred against Israel, against the occupation, and against Israel. Recently, people found out that his father was the real estate agent, and he sold big part of Israel to the Jews. Means the wealth of the family comes from selling lands to the Jews already in the 30s and the 40s. So since this thing came out, Arabs started to laugh. Excuse me? Your family money comes from selling lands to the Jews, and you want us to go and liberate Palestine for you? That you can sell them again? To make again? You have no idea.
In your article, you talked about the fact that there are, in the Gaza Strip, Palestinians who don't pay taxes, but they get assistance and food and whatnot, and then they're renting to others property. So they're living off the handouts,
UNRWA.
and now they're getting money from rent.
Right.
What?
So, all these combinations. And when these things were revealed, people started in the Arab world say, excuse me, you are actually blackmailing us. You are squeezing our pockets after our emotions for 72 years. Go to hell and go make peace with the Israelis. They are the best option which you have. What do you want? Make peace with the Syrians who killed your Hamas in the Arab Spring? And people like myself who appear in the Arab media, I keep saying in the Arab media that the Palestinians should thank God 5 times every day when they pray that their issue is with the Israelis and not with the Egyptians and not with the Syrians, not with the Iraqis, not with the Libyans, and not with any of their Arab brethren. Because we all know how exactly their brothers would treat them if they had to fight them. Just look at they treat each other. So they actually should raise their hands 5 times a day, praising Allah and thanking Allah that their problems with the Israelis, with the Supreme Court, which now decided another thing for them. So, and the Arab world, people do not want to be, I don't know how you say it in English, maybe suckers, I don't know. There is some kind of a word. They don't want to be cheated time and again and again and again and again.
Do you think that we'll see that there are reports of talks between Israel and Syria? You foresee that happening? Some normalization, or actually you need a peace treaty there?
Look, Israel, in my humble view, will have a very, very clear condition that the Iranians are leaving Syria before we start even the talking. Because, as you know, Israel already declared and acts according to this declaration.
Yes.
That Israel will target any Iranian presence on the Syrian soil. This is a casus belli. And Israel actually is doing.
Yes.
And you understand, and you see that Iranians, except one time, they never retaliated for what Israel is doing to them time and again and again and again. By the way, this is another reason why the Emirates and Bahrain, who are shaking and shivering out of fear from the Iranians, want to stick to Israel. Because Israel so far is the only country in the world, except for the Soleimani issue, which acts against the Iranians.
Is it chutzpah that Qatar is going to ask the United States, or has asked the United States, to sell it an unknown quantity of the F-15 jets? I mean, it's an ally of Iran. Why would the U.S. do that?
Especially look, if I was Donald Trump, I would tweet, Qatar asked F-35 airplanes. We are fully ready to supply it in a condition that Qatar assures us that Iranians will never touch those airplanes. However, as long as Qatar is in bed with the Iranians, we have some concerns about the ability of the Iranians to have access to these airplanes. So, if Qatar wants these airplanes, first cut your ties with Iran, and then we'll consider it. If I was this is actually the only thing to tell them. Because look, who with the right mind will give this kind of airplanes with such a high technology to a country which is in bed with the Iranians?
Exactly.
Look, let me just tell you, Stewart,
please.
my solution for the Palestinian problem is this map. The Palestinian Emirates plan. This map behind me. Gaza is a state, should be a state by itself. Another emirate in Hebron for the clans of Hebron. Another one in Ramallah for the clans of Ramallah. Another one in Jericho for the clan of Jericho. Another one in Nablus for the clans of Nablus. Another one in Tulkarem and Kalkilia and Jenin. This is the only thing which works in the Middle East based on clans, just like the Emirates in the Gulf. Because each and every one is based on a clan, just like here. This is the only paradigm, political paradigm, which is connected to the tradition of the Middle East, rather than adopting ideologies which were brought from Europe or from America, and they caused the atrocities of Syria, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, and so forth.
Let me just tell everybody because of the pandemic, your tour of the United States is off, but you are doing Zoom conferences and Zoom meetings with community groups, and you'll see it on the screen there where people can contact you, and we really appreciate you taking the time, Mordechai Kedar, and talking to us today here on Jewish Life. Until next week. Thank you. Until next week, have a good one. You foresee that there will be more of these Arab countries adding to UAE and Bahrain, and we're going to see many more, correct?
Let me tell you a secret. The diamond in the crown is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is actually ruled today by two people. The King Salman, and
Yes.
his son MBS.
Mostly his son, isn't it?
The son would sign with Israel yesterday, or with the Emiratis and the Bahrainis. No doubt. But his father is against it still. So we only have to wait a little bit until
His father's how old now? How old is his father?
Very old. He's 80 something and he's not
Yes.
healthy.
No.
So, in the Middle East, things advance like the way which porcupines make children, very slowly and very carefully.
Well, okay. So that once the Saudis come aboard, and then that would really open it up, wouldn't it not? And that might convince the Palestinians to say, we're out in the cold here.
Look, I expect that very soon, the latest will be when Abu Mazen is leaving us.
Yes.
That some cities in the Palestinian Authority will declare independence from the Palestinian Authority. They will rebel against the central, because the Palestinian Authority actually lost all its credibility. And there are already many articles published in the Palestinian press dealing with the weight of the clans, which is going up, while the weight of the Palestinian Authority, which is going down. And the weight means the power. Weight means loyalty. Weight means who controls the street. So the policeman is the clans. Some Americans do not like it, because for them, they look at it like mafia, like, Cosa Nostra, all kinds of things like this. But in the Arab world is the only thing which, Qatar is a clan state of Al Thani. Abu Dhabi is a clan state of Al Nahyan. This is the name of the clan. Dubai is another clan state. Kuwait is Al Sabah clan. Okay? The clan system in the Arab world is the only system which works. You can say unfortunately, you can say fortunately, but this is your own approach.
Yes.
They have their own way of thinking and way of behavior and way of conduct and way of organization. Okay? Democracy is something which might fit the culture of Western countries, of Western societies. Like, I'm not so sure that today the United States behaves, the man in the street, in such a democratic way. What's so democratic in riots and taking out statues of the founding fathers and looting and stealing the elections by ballots? Okay? So I'm not sure that democracy is so flourishing also in the West, in Europe. So what do you expect? That in the Arab world, democracy will be more successful than in Europe or in America, when they have absolutely no democratic experience, democratic thought, democratic behavior, and let alone the fact that the democracy is against Islam. Because democracy is equality between citizens, equality between men and women, equality of the LGBTQ community, which Islam cannot even fathom. It's equality between Christians, Muslims, Jews, which Islam cannot take. It's equality, it's freedom of speech. You cannot speak against Islam. Freedom of religion. Freedom from religion. Can you go in an Islamic street and announce that you are living Islam? Forget it. Okay? And elections. Okay. But democracy is not only elections. Democracy has many components. And all those components, I would say, create those ingredients of the democratic cake, create severe allergy in Islamic societies. What do you mean? Freedom of women. Freedom of women to do whatever they like, with whoever they like, whenever they like, as of the age of 18? Excuse me? To marry whoever they like? Or maybe marry a girl? Okay? So all the ideas which are actually the cornerstones of democracy cannot be accepted in traditional, conservative, Islamic, and you know what? Jewish communities as well. Oh, talk with a Haredim in Borough Park about freedom of women, freedom of religion. Okay? Yes. It's the same answer.
I'm interested in what you said before about some cities in the West Bank declaring independence from the PA, Palestinian Authority. Which ones do you think? Jericho or which ones do you see?
If Israel announced its sovereignty over the Jordan Valley, where Jericho is, Jericho would be, by definition, an island inside Israel, means an emirate. Since it apparently doesn't happen in the foreseeable future, what I think that the city which is the closest to this point is Hebron. Because the society in Hebron is very traditional, very conservative. Even the language in Hebron is different. Once you open your mouth and you are from Khalili, means you are from Hebron, people know that you are from there.
What about the Jews living there?
It's like Jerusalem and Tel Aviv.
I mean, the Jews living in Hebron, what's going to happen to them?
They can live there because the people in Hebron have nothing against them. Right. Most of them. Okay, the Hamas might have something, or the PLO, but the people, and it will be with agreements between every emirate and Israel. Bilateral agreements. If they want to have a union, let them have a union. As long as they are separate territorially. And just like, and actually to copy or to emulate the paradigm, the political paradigm of the Emirates in the Gulf, which is the clan-based state. Okay, there are all kinds of concerns about women, the status of women. And actually, I'm corresponding with a lady who lives near Jenin, who started asking me about this plan. Because this plan, I talk about this in the Arab meeting. So she said that, you know, this plan looks okay, but you have to know that the status of women in such a system of the clan is very low. Because only the men are those who are making the decisions. So I asked her, okay, what do you prefer? Being a woman in Syria, which was very progressive, or women in Iraq, which was very liberal, or women in Libya, which promoted women tremendously? So she writes to me, you convinced me. Okay?
Right.
I'm not saying that the clan system is perfect. No system is perfect. Even the American one is not perfect, as we see. Okay? But you have to take the system which fits the best your culture. Because this ensures you that the system which you adopt will at least be stable.
Right.
Okay? This is so when you ask actually, I was asked the same thing in Denver, Colorado, when I was there last year, and I gave a lecture about this. So one of the ladies, I think she was one of the feminist movement of the Jewish community of Colorado. She started, nagging me. What do you mean? Class, women they were disenfranchised. That's what she used. How can you accept that half of the population is disenfranchised? This was the term which she
right,
used.
Disenfranchised, right.
Franchise. So I said, so what do you think those women disenfranchised prefer? This system or a system which kills them, rapes them, or their daughters in front of their eyes, as it is in Syria, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, and Sudan? Where do you think is better for them to live? So she left the room. Because everybody was laughing at her. Okay?
Gotcha.
Disenfranchised. Okay. I love this question. You know why? Because this question comes from the deepest place of the American culture. You cannot tell a woman, or you cannot create a situation where a woman in the States is disenfranchised. Excuse me? I'm just like you. Okay? This, in America, it works.
Right.
Not in the Middle East.
That's the difference, and that's great. That's why we have you here, because you can explain to what's going on.
Americans find it very hard to get out of their American thinking and start thinking like other cultures. I think I said it under your auspice when you moderated the debate between me and some liberal guy. It was in Dix Hills. The Jewish Center of, I think it was in Dix Hills.
Dix Hills Jewish Center?
Was it there or was it?
Could have been, or maybe Huntington Jewish Center?
Huntington, right, Huntington.
Was it Huntington?
Yeah, you moderated it. And this is exactly what I said there, that people in America think like Americans, and good so. Unfortunately, they think like Americans when they deal with other cultures as well. And it doesn't work. This is no way to succeed.
Right.
Just like you cannot fix your Chevrolet in a garage of Kia.
Good analogy.
It's a different spare parts, different computer, different everything, and the expertise and the spare parts. So what are you going to do with your broken Chevrolet in a garage of Kia?
Right.
So whoever understands this, the Chevrolet needs a garage of Chevrolet, while Kia can take care only of Kia cars. You should already understand that American mindset can solve American problems. While in order to solve the problems of the Middle East, you have to think like Middle Easterner.
Exactly. Mordechai Kedar, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.